It was a dark and stormy night in the small town of Ravenswood. The kind of night where the wind howls and the rain beats against the windows with a relentless fury. Rachel had just moved to town and was renting a quaint little cottage on the outskirts of the town. She had heard rumors of strange happenings in the area, but she didn't believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. That was until she experienced something that would change her life forever. One night, while Rachel was sitting in her living room reading a book, she heard a faint tapping sound coming from the window. She ignored it at first, thinking it was just a branch blowing in the wind. But the tapping persisted, becoming louder and more insistent. Rachel finally got up and walked to the window, peering outside to see what was causing the noise. But there was nothing there, just the darkness and the pouring rain. Rachel shrugged it off and went back to her book, but the tapping started up again, this time more frantic and urgent. She hesitated before walking back to the window, this time pulling back the curtains to get a better look. What she saw made her blood run cold. There, outside her window, was a figure staring directly at her with piercing red eyes. Rachel stumbled back, tripping over the coffee table and falling to the floor. She scrambled to her feet and ran to the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was like something was holding it shut from the other side. She was trapped. The tapping grew louder, morphing into an incessant pounding that echoed through the cottage. Rachel cowered in a corner, praying for the terror to end. But it didn't. The pounding continued, becoming more violent with each passing moment. And then, suddenly, it stopped. Rachel was too scared to move. She sat there, trembling, waiting for something to happen. But the only sound was the pounding of her own heart. She eventually managed to get up and check the window again, but the figure was gone. She searched the entire house, but there was no sign of anyone or anything. Rachel never found out what had caused the tapping and the pounding, but she knew that she was not alone in the cottage. From that night on, she never felt safe in her own home, and eventually she had to leave Ravenswood altogether. Years later, when a group of teenagers were exploring the abandoned cottage, they stumbled upon something that would finally reveal the truth behind Rachel's terror. In the basement, they found a hidden room with a shrine dedicated to a woman named Lila, who had been brutally murdered in the cottage years ago. The tapping and pounding that Rachel had heard that night were the ghostly footsteps of Lila, who was still haunting the house, seeking revenge for her untimely death. From that day on, no one ever stepped foot in the cottage again, and Lila's spirit was finally able to rest in peace. But Rachel's haunting memories of that fateful night would stay with her for the rest of her life. As soon as the sun set over the desert, the howls of coyotes could be heard in the distance. The lone traveler, a man named Jack, had been hiking through the desert for hours and was in desperate need of rest. He stumbled upon an abandoned gas station, its neon sign flickering in the night. Jack decided to take his chances and entered the station. The air inside was musty and stale, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and dust covering every surface. Jack found an old armchair and slumped into it, letting out a deep sigh of relief. But his moment of rest was short-lived. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and a tall, lean man walked in. His eyes were piercing, and his movements were slow and deliberate. "Welcome to the oasis," the man said in a gravelly voice. "I'm the caretaker." Jack didn't like the sound of that, but he didn't want to be rude either. "Thanks," he said. "I'm just passing through." The caretaker's eyes narrowed. "Passing through, huh?" he said. "You're not from around here, are you?" Jack hesitated for a moment before answering. "No, I'm not." The caretaker let out a low chuckle. "Well then, you best be careful," he said. "The desert can be a dangerous place, especially at night." Jack nodded, not liking the tone of the caretaker's voice. "I'll keep that in mind," he said. As the caretaker started to leave, Jack noticed something strange. He was carrying what appeared to be a rifle. "What's that for?" Jack asked, pointing to the gun. The caretaker's face grew dark. "Just in case," he said, before disappearing out the door. Jack was left alone in the station once again, his mind racing with thoughts of danger lurking in the dark. He decided to leave and continue his journey through the desert. But as he stepped out of the station, he heard something that made his blood run cold. The sound of a howling coyote followed by another and another. And then he heard the sound of something else, something that sounded like the footsteps of a man. He turned around and saw the caretaker, rifle in hand, walking towards him. Jack turned and ran as fast as he could, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the caretaker's footsteps getting closer and closer, and he knew that he was in grave danger. But just when he thought that all hope was lost, he saw a light in the distance. It was a car coming towards him. As the car pulled up next to him, Jack scrambled inside, gasping for breath. The driver, an old man, looked at him with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked. Jack nodded, barely able to speak. "Thank you," he managed to say. The old man smiled. "No problem, son," he said. "I've seen my fair share of strange things out here in the desert. It's not safe for anyone to be out here alone at night." As the car drove away, Jack couldn't help but think about the strange caretaker and his warning. He knew that he had narrowly escaped a dangerous situation, and he made a mental note to be more careful in the future. The desert may be beautiful, but it could also be deadly. In the small town of Millfield, there was a local legend about an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. The mansion had been built by a wealthy family over a century ago, but it had been left empty for years after the family mysteriously disappeared. The locals whispered stories about how the mansion was haunted and how strange things had been seen there at night. Despite the rumors, a group of teenagers decided to explore the mansion on Halloween night. They were looking for a thrill and thought it would be fun to explore the supposedly haunted mansion. As they approached the mansion, they noticed that the door was slightly ajar. It seemed like an invitation, and they eagerly stepped inside. The mansion was dark and musty, and the teenagers could hear strange noises coming from all around. They were filled with a sense of unease, but they continued exploring, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. As they climbed the stairs to the second floor, they saw a figure in the distance. It was standing at the end of the hallway, shrouded in darkness. The figure appeared to be a man, but his face was hidden behind a hood. The teenagers tried to shine their flashlights on him, but the light seemed to bounce off of him, making it impossible to see his face. Suddenly, the man began to move towards them, his steps slow and deliberate. The teenagers tried to run, but the doors to the hallway had all locked shut. They were trapped, and the man was getting closer. As he reached them, they could hear his ragged breathing and feel the chill of his presence. And then, without warning, he lunged at them. The teenagers screamed as the man attacked them, his claws ripping through their flesh. They tried to fight him off, but he was too strong. One by one, they fell to his wrath, their bodies torn and mutilated. The next morning, the police arrived at the mansion and found the bodies of the teenagers. The mansion had been empty for years, and no one knew how the man had gotten inside. The locals whispered that the mansion was truly haunted, and that the man they had seen was the ghost of the family that had disappeared over a century ago. But the truth was far more terrifying. The mansion had become home to a crazed killer who had been living in the shadows for years. He had been watching the town for years, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. And on that fateful Halloween night, he had found his victims. The mansion would remain abandoned and cursed, a reminder of the horrors that had occurred within its walls. Thanks for watching today's video. Please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It really helps us out. And until next time, stay safe and never wander too far from the light.